This is a Film Stories original podcast.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I am a writer and film critic, and today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Geoff Dyer. He has written on many things. He's a novelist, but today I really want to talk to him about two major books for me about films, each of them about an individual film, Zona, which is about the Tarkovsky film Stalker, and Broadsword to Danny Boy. I was just about to get the title wrong there. I was just about to invert that. I was going to say Danny Boy to Broadsword, but that's not right, is it?
Well, you actually did still get the title wrong, John. It's Broadsword Calling Danny Boy.
Oh, my word. It's the word in the middle I got wrong.
Yeah, I only say that to stop you being bombarded by the Where Eagles Dare geeks who are out there who would have, jumped down your throat to correct you. So I thought I'd jump down your throat and correct you instead.
Rightly so. And in preparation for this podcast, I thought, should I watch Stalker or should I watch Where Eagles Dare? And I'm ashamed to say I watched Where Eagles Dare last night, despite the fact that both of these films are sort of fundamentally important to me, as indeed they are to you.
Yeah, and, but let me reassure you, even though I don't want to sound like your therapist, there is no shame to be had in watching Where Eagles Dare.
I was thinking this as I was watching it, because I was there's this sort of horrible phrase, guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
And I was watching it, and I'd always thought, oh, it's a bit of a guilty pleasure, this. It isn't. It's a really good film. It's objectively a great film.
You're absolutely right, John, because, I, in a sense, I share your dislike of that stupid phrase, guilty pleasure. But yeah, I have it sort of, in a way, sort of categorized as the same thing. But it's very definitely not. It's so different if we think of other films from our childhoods that we have a great fondness for because they meant so much for us as kids. But the truth is they really don't stand up to repeated watchings as an adult. So if you think of a classic instance of that, I think would be, say, The Italian Job, a film for which I feel a great fondness and I remember it very, very vividly. But it's just a sort of silly, stupid, childish caper. It's embedded in my consciousness, but it's not to be watched seriously all the way through. And in fact, I've never, as an adult, succeeded in watching it all the way through. Zulu, I would say, comes midway between Where Eagles Dare and The Italian Job. But anyway, Where Eagles Dare, it just stands up as a cinematic experience. And I'm always struck by the way that if I start watching a bit of it, it has this great narrative propulsion which carries me through to the end. So we're absolutely in accord on that.
And the first half of the film is so funny because it's like multiple Chekhov's guns being drawn and put on the table and sort of wrapped around pillars and all the rest of it. Chekhov's tripwires and dynamite, basically.
Yes, very good. Yes, that's a very, very good point. And also, it's a great. I think it's. We'll talk about David Thompson later, but I know he takes issue with Catherine Bigelow's idea that action cinema is pure cinema, and I think he's right to dissent from that idea. But there's a lot of action in Where Eagles Dare, and right from the beginning, I feel that we give ourselves over to this great, it's going to be a great cinematic experience right from those opening shots of the plane surfing over the Alps.
Yeah, and you talk about the redness of the titles against that blue, and nowadays we have this idea of blue and teal, the teal and orange sort of being the sort of go-to color wheel of cinema. But that red and blue has got it beat. Those 1960s, 1970s color schemes were so wonderful.
Yes, yeah, and also with that very sort of wide, I can't remember, what was it filmed in? Panavision, or certainly it's got that, that great expansiveness. Having said all of that, it is wonderful to see it at the cinema, on the cinema, but also, I mean, I think most of us have seen it many times on the television, and it translates rather well onto TV as well, doesn't it?
There's a certain busyness about the film as well. A lot of the film is taken up with a couple of people just doing stuff wordlessly, as Clint Eastwood and Richard Burton just pottering around and unpacking bags and packing bags. You talk about the magic sort of bottomless rucksacks they seem to have.
Yes, that's right. Because they parachute into Germany with a minimal amount of stuff. There are those kind of containers that are parachuted in, but they fill up their rucksacks or Bergens or whatever you want to call them. And it's quite amazing the amount of how capacious those rucksacks are. I mean, really, if we think of our current experience of being on planes, especially in America, where you really need some sort of status from your frequent flyer miles if you're to have any hope of getting your bag into the overhead lockers. I feel if you could get a bag like that, whereby everything you wanted for a long stay in very bad weather could be contained in a bag which would fit into the overhead bins. Wow, that would be a major breakthrough in luggage.
And they've got great coats and everything.
Yes, that's right. And they've got great coats. They've got great coats in every sense. They've got those thick kind of German uniform great coats, but also they've got those very stylish kind of parkas. And they still, now that way of dressing is kind of how people dress all the time, that sort of version of youth hosteling wear, as personified by the Gallagher brothers, meets kind of military functional camping wear. Yeah, it was very prophetic in that sort of fashion sense.
But of course, they're kind of Airbnb-ing it in a barn. So
that's good. I wish I'd thought of that. Yeah, that is very good. Yeah, it's a classic bit of Airbnb, isn't it? Yeah, very good.
Heidi's coming. Heidi's in the. We've got our contact, and we need to go to her and get the keys before we're allowed in.
That is superb, John. Oh my God, we've only been on the podcast for 10 minutes and I've already been significantly upstaged.
That's not my intention, but I'm inspired. That's what it is. I'm inspired.
Oh, that's very good.
Can I go back and ask about, because we're sort of doing this a little bit about out of order, so can I go back and ask about what's your relationship to cinema as a writer, because those books came relatively later on in your career. You've already established yourself as a writer prior to those two books.
There's sort of two strands to this. For a very brief while in London, I was a film reviewer for that magazine Blitz, and we used to go to these screenings, about 20 people, and then I'd write these little reviews. And in fact, I was telling my wife the other day when we went to the Cinematheque here to see a special screening of Blue Velvet, occasioned by David Lynch's Dying, and it was great, a huge cinema, sort of 500 people in there, something like that. And I remember that was a film that I'd reviewed at the time when it came out. And I stopped doing that quite quickly, because even though I'm as cheap as anyone, I realized that the perks of seeing a film for free were really minor. It's a very cheap pleasure. It certainly was back then in London to go to the cinema. And the effort of knowing I had to review a film rather sort of detracted from the fun of it. And I realized I actually liked going to the cinema. I loved going to the Ritzy cinema in Brixton. So that was about it. And then just very occasionally, I've written odd sort of pieces about a film that I happen to have seen. So it's been really quite minimal. And then the other strand about sort of writing and cinema is that for the last 10 years, I've been living in Los Angeles. And, I meet people from time to time and they ask what I do. So I say I'm a writer. And they say, oh, scripts. And I say, no, not at all. And of course, at that point, they totally lose what little interest they had in me before the question was answered. But I've never had any desire to write for. The only relationship I want with films and filmmaking is just to watch the films. The idea of collaborate, I don't want to collaborate, and film is all about collaborating. But mainly what I don't want to do is I hate the way that to really make any progress with a script, you've always got to get permission from somebody to go to the next stage. So typically, as far as I understand it, you write a proposal and then you might do a synopsis or something. And then at each stage, you get a bit more permission, a bit more money to go on to the next stage. And what I love about writing books is that you don't need anyone's permission. You're completely unrestrained by budget. If you can arrange the time, it's no more expensive to write a book involving the Battle of Borodino. It's no more expensive budget-wise to do that than it is to write a book like Nicholson Baker's The Mezzanine, just set in somebody's lunch hour. So I like the way that, these kind of often ghastly Hollywood actors talk about some passion project as a way often of validating the fact that they've done 20 films of just pure and utter rubbish. But the nice thing about being a properly, and this kind of thing of it being independent cinema, I love the way that if you're a writer, you're entirely independent. And publishers, if they're the equivalent of producers or studios, they're very, very tolerant about the commercial shortcomings of a project, partly because the investment, the stakes are really, really quite low. And the other thing, I guess, I would say is that I don't really know what script writing involves, but as far as I can tell, if you want there to be a sunset, you just say sunset. Whereas for me, the pleasure of writing prose is to actually describe the sunset, and talk about it being, lovely golden blaze and all that sort of stuff. So, anyway, that's a long answer to a quite straightforward question and a very straightforward position on my part.
William Goldman, in one of his books, talks about, I think it's for George Henry Miller, he sends him a script to critique as part of the book, and he writes, exterior, an impossibly a beautifully blue sky. And George Roy Miller goes back to him and says, how am I supposed to shoot that? How do I find that, But as a writer, of course, that says something, it evokes something.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it reminds me of that Martin Amis kind of bit of advice where he says, if something's indescribable, then don't try to describe it.
Oh, I'm curious, by the way, you mentioned Blue Velvet. How did you feel it held up when was there a difference in your viewing experience? Was there new things that you noticed, or how was it?
Yeah, not so much, because by all accounts, everyone says what an incredibly nice man David Lynch was, and I've never met him, but that counts. Whenever I hear of someone famous, someone who's met someone famous, the question I always want to ask is, was he or she nice? So I like the way that David Lynch was so famously nice. But the truth is, his films have never really done anything for me, actually. I thought Razorhead and The Elephant Man particularly, I thought, oh, that would have been so great if The Elephant Man weren't in it and if it was just a sort of adaptation of a Dickens novel or something like that. So that whole fascination that Lynch has with the grotesque, I find it so utterly devoid of interest. So all the grotesquerie of Blue Velvet and to use the Arbus phrase, the sort of freaks that he seems so fascinated by, just doesn't do it for me. And for me, he was always paired in a way with Spielberg. And, they're both very, very accomplished film directors. And whereas Spielberg is accused often of discovering a sort of sentimental essence of America. With Lynch, he discovers this grotesquerie, the dark forces of the unconscious or whatever. And I think if I had to choose which of those two discovered areas were the more profound. I would think that the Spielberg one is for me. So that would be my feeling about that. The other huge disappointment for me about Blue Velvet was that I was so looking forward to hearing Dennis Hopper say what for me is one of the greatest lines of dialogue in cinema history when he says, I ate so much pussy, my beard was like a glazed donut, which I think is just such a fantastic line. And then it was one of those weird moments. This great line wasn't in the film, and I knew it was. I was sure it was. Anyway, subsequent research afterwards revealed that actually maybe you can tell everyone which film does Dennis Hopper actually say that great line in?
Oh God, would it be? Oh, well, there are so many candidates. I was thinking like The Last Movie or Tracks, possibly, but no, you've got me.
Oh, this is great. I've managed to make it a 1-1 draw after your great comment about the Airbnb and Where Eagles Dare. So it turns out it's in River's Edge.
Ah, right, of course, yes.
Yeah. So but that it's funny when you go to the movies like that, and I'd have put my house on that line being in Blue Velvet, and then it turns out that one's memory can't be relied on.
Yeah, that's a very Lynchian thing as well, of having lines drift from one movie to another. It's a
right,
porous
yes.
nature of the town. Yeah. I live in this little village in Italy, and like every village, there's like a zona industriale, the industrial zone where all the little factories are. And sometimes at night in the summer, you'll hear a sort of pneumatic thumping. And I always think, oh, that the Lynchland is over there. It's literally
very good.
The other side of the tracks,
Yes, yeah. It's strange, that Lynch thing, because I mean, for example, I think 2 or 3 times I've abandoned Mulholland Drive. It just doesn't do it. Just doesn't do anything for me. He definitely has a vision, but it's not one that resonates with me at all.
It's strange that this niceness, which has been brought up a lot in his, and it's fitting that it should be, immediately after his death. But having lived through his career, it's been a very up and down kind of trajectory. And I remember him being, accused of various forms of misogyny and nastiness during his career. So it's kind of weird that he sort of, the memification of David Lynch has rendered him into this little Zen master,
Yes, that's right.
Isn't it? Anyway, let's get on to Tarkovsky, because again, this is a film that really resonates deeply with me, and that I kind of, when I found your book on it, I was thinking, oh, this is a perfect marriage, because I previously read your work and loved it, and so it's like reading one of your favorite writers on one of your favorite films. It's just like, oh, this could either be the worst possible thing or the best possible thing, and I'm glad to say it was the latter. So how did this book come about?
It came about, as many of my books do, with it started as an article in a newspaper. And also, as is quite often in my life, it started with a sort of thing of irritation. So I was living in London, and there was some kind of screening of Stalker, and they'd invited a writer I knew to take part in a discussion of the merits of Stalker afterwards. And I was immediately thinking, why didn't they ask me? And it's possible nobody asked me because I hadn't gone public with my love of Stalker at that point. So anyway, in that sense of sort of seething indignation, I said to The Guardian, could I write something about Stalker in advance of this, in an attempt to upstage this discussion? And very early on in the process of basically saying why this film meant so much to me, I hit upon a particular tone as I described the opening scenes, and I just really liked this tone. And as the days went by, I kept saying to The Guardian, could I have a bit more space, please? Could I have a bit more room? And eventually I came up against the ceiling of what could be said, and the piece was published and all that kind of stuff. But it just really, I was having such a good time, and I discovered this tone as I basically summarized certain scenes, the opening scenes really, that I really liked. Anyway, and that just just stuck with me as a potential thing, because quite often arriving at a style for a book is so important to me, and often I don't arrive at it until quite a bit later, but almost instantly I had this. Anyway, then we sort of, I can't remember, a little bit later, I sold this novel I'd been writing to a new publisher, and then they wondered if I had another book that I wanted to do, but I used to play tennis with my publisher, so I said, and this was when Andy Murray was poised to perhaps win a Grand Slam champion. I said, how about a book about tennis? And they said, yes, that's great. It was all wonderful. I didn't have to write a proposal. It was all huggy, huggy, kissy, kissy, So anyway, so then I set about trying to write this book about tennis, and I just couldn't make any progress at all. And it's one thing I know about the writing life is the very worst thing you can do is to try to ride a bike with the brakes on. You're just exhausting yourself. You're having no fun at all. Anyway, to avoid sinking into that writerly despair of failing to do something that you're obliged to do, I went back to Stalker and continuing this thing that I'd been doing in the article, and I thought, I know, I'm just gonna summarize the whole film scene by scene, almost shot by shot, in that similar style, and it was just so. I went instantly from the misery of failing to write the tennis book, which I was obliged to write, to this lovely thing of bunking off in the day to just summarizing Stalker. And it was happy, because at the end of a given day, it was a happy period, because at the end of a given day, I'd actually written something and I was having a good time and I was chuckling to myself. And crucially, I was discovering things about the film. I was articulating to myself why this film meant so much to me. And occasionally the publisher would call and say, how's the book going? And I'd say, it's going fantastically well. I didn't tell them at that point that it was the thing that was going so well was actually a book about Tarkovsky, which wasn't even a book at that point, because why would anyone want to read it? And eventually, as my egotistical sense of myself took over, I thought, oh, maybe it is a book, and maybe it's not just a book, maybe it's actually publishable. And anyway, to cut a slightly long story short, I handed it in to both the American and British publishers, and to their great credit, whereas they could have said, this isn't the book we commissioned, a book which they commissioned, which had a certain amount of commercial appeal, they published it in lieu of the tennis book. Wow. And I guess there's a further point I'd make here about this, which is that I talked earlier on about the way that I don't like having to get permission to go ahead with a writing project. A book like that, as a proposal, it's completely unpublishable. It doesn't have any viability at all. You put in the proposal, I'm going to summarize a rather obscure Russian film, which at that point was very difficult to see in the cinema, because I think the license had expired, the print had pretty well worn itself out. The print that was sort of serving the whole of the Western world. Yes, completely. Nobody would, if you were able to get an advance for £1,000 to do a book like that, you'd be doing rather well. But, I just go ahead and write this unpublishable book. And then after that, when people can see what it is, then the unpublishable thing is suddenly actually viable. So there's a nice moral in that story, I think.
I love what you said earlier when you said you found the tone for it, because that's the thing that really strikes me about both the books, that there is a tone which makes something which, as you say, if you wrote a synopsis of it or a pitch, it would be like, this is really what you're going to do, a DVD commentary, in print. But it's that tone. I really wanted to ask you about this, and I hope this doesn't sound like a silly question, but your use of swearing when you write is like that. It's just that sweet spot of humor, You sort of can't. I don't know. William Hazlitt once said, "Wit is a salt of conversation, not the food."
Yeah.
That's the same thing with you and swearing. You use it like salt in your story, in your writing. That it just gives it flavour, yet at the same time, it doesn't overwhelm what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I think generally with swearing, I mean, we all now swear a great deal in real life, and you have to radically reduce the amount of swearing on the page. So when I did a revised version, I had to do there was a chance. My first novel, The Colour of Memory, was being reprinted, and I had a chance to make some changes to it. And one of the things I did was cut a lot of the swearing because it was just seemed so excessive. But yeah, the tone is so important, isn't it, for books? You know, typically when someone recommends a book to you, or not typically, but when people recommend a book to you and then they start summarizing the plot, I mean, you always tune out at that point. Who cares about the plot? But quite often you read a book, and irrespective of what it's about, you decide on the basis of the first couple of pages whether you like the author's voice or tone. And in the case of the Tarkovsky book, it was really, the tone was, first of all, such a pleasure for me to write. I was, I'm in it for me, and I was having a good time writing it, and I was chuckling and all this kind of stuff. But I think more seriously, or more importantly, it's this thing of a tone that is both insightful and funny, and crucially, I mean, this is really important for that particular film. I mean, Tarkovsky inspires this deep reverence, and he becomes this sort of saint, Saint Tolstoyevsky kind of figure. And in the very early on, I mean, that's not me, that's not my nature. I have no capacity for reverence at all. I have great capacity for loving and admiring, but loving and admiring are completely compatible with with two things. One, with being funny, and also with inquiry. If you revere something, that's an end in itself. All you do is just revere. Whereas if you love something, and this even applies to people you fall in love with, then you're always thinking, oh, what is it? Why am I so in love with? Why am I so in love with her? And you can even think about sort of Shakespeare in this regard. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? No, thou art more lovely and more temperate. So there it is, that kind of thing. I really. You're lovely, but that comparison is not quite good enough. So contained in that instinct or that impulse to love, there's that kind of thing of critical inquiry. So for me, the tone was a way of combining a kind of the sort of two strands of my formation, really. On the one hand, that deep English love of basically a carry-on approach to life, and at the same time, of course, I'm not a total idiot. I would never claim that the carry-on films represent a great summit of art, whereas, the Stalker is so clearly a profound work of art, which, but some sort of nice combination of those two things, I think, and I guess the other thing I should say is that I think it was at about the time I was starting the book, I was reading J.M. Coetzee writing about Dostoevsky, and he asked himself this question: why is it that the more every time I reread the Brothers Karamazov, he says, he becomes more susceptible to its power and often finds himself in tears. And I found that the more I saw Stalker, the more profoundly it affected me, and the more convinced I became of its greatness. And then, just as a postscript to that, even after writing this film, which explained to me how certain things were done in it and why it meant a lot to me, I found that I was my sense of its greatness had been enhanced. So I hadn't wrung it dry, as it were.
It wasn't exhausted. And I mean, Tarkovsky, it's so funny that as well, his second film, Andrey Rublev, is all about an icon painter and is in itself sort of iconoclastic. And yet he becomes an icon, despite the fact that he wears those ridiculous short shorts that you mentioned in the book.
Yes, yeah. And there's a follow-up to that, though. I do love the way that in recent years, there's of course the film, but then the similarly named Andrey Rublev, the tennis player, I mean, he's one of the funnest players to watch because he has the most volcanic temper of any tennis player. So I like the way that he's become an icon of explosive self-destructive rage. This other Rublev.
I always like the fact that I think it's unintentional, but in Solaris, the main character, Chris, sort of wears a string vest for half of the film. And I was just thinking, is that intentional? Is he supposed to look that grubby? Or is it he looks like someone who hangs up his tea bags so he can use them more than once.
Yes, well, I like the sort of famous sort of budget nature of the Soviet space program, and that famous old joke about the way that the Americans would spend, however many millions it was to find a pen that would write in zero gravity, and the Russians used a pencil.
Exactly.
So I think his vest is another instance of that. And there were some pictures published in The Guardian recently of the place wherever it is where rockets are launched from and descend to. And, God, it's the most advanced technology available, getting rockets into space. And then they crash down into this kind of rather impoverished looking kind of thing where people are scrounging around for sort of bits of, hoping there might be a spare Coke, an old Coke can they can recycle among the wreckage.
It's interesting that you said as well that Stalker remains undiminished for you after having this. I mean, when you were writing the book, were you, were you sort of playing scenes and then writing your chapters? How were you? Or were you doing it from memory? How were you doing it?
Yeah, initially I thought it was quite important to do it entirely from memory for quite a simple reason, really, in that it's very difficult even for the people who are there to say what the zone is like. It's changing all the time, isn't it? According to your moods and all this kind of stuff. I mean, it's in a state of constant consciousness determined flux. So I thought it would be helpful to get down my remembered version of what was going on in the film. But obviously, at some point, then I needed to check it against the reality. So then I did get a DVD of it, which I had playing to check things. And those moments when my memory of it diverged from the reality were quite important. And I think whenever I made a sort of really egregious mistake in what was happening, I corrected it. But it was really, really remarkable the way that the film stood up to this repeated scrutiny, so that, magicians never want you to. They rarely repeat tricks because they don't want you to see how it's done, because once you see how it's done, the magic is over. The zone is a magical place, and there are certain bits in the book where I explain how technically certain things are done. So I think there's a very persuasive bit where I explain how it is that we get this sense of the zone as a place of sentient consciousness. And I explain it just technically in terms of what the camera's doing. And even after that, I mean, still the magic of the zone, the magic of the film persists. And I mean, to the extent that after the book came out, I was invited to do all sorts to introduce the film, all sorts of screenings. And that was great.
Yeah, you got what you wanted. That was the whole reason you did the book.
Free tickets for Stalker. And always it was the same thing. I'd sort of do my introduction and then think, oh, now I'll go to the pub or have dinner or something. And if there was a Q&A afterwards, I'd come back for that. But I'd always take my seat and think, oh, I'll just watch it for a bit. I'll watch it until I get into the zone. I mean, I would nearly always just sit through the whole thing because I just found it so, so wonderful. If maybe when I was watching the film in my 40s, I would be, occasionally a little tear would trickle down my cheeks. I've found myself quite regularly just sobbing with emotion at the power of Stalker. So I'm very happy the way that I didn't end up killing the thing I loved. My love for it just increased.
Yeah, I had an experience a couple of years ago when I went to Tallinn to the film festival.
Oh.
One of the reasons I wanted to go was, of course, Stalker's filmed in Tallinn or nearby. And I looked on my phone, locations for Stalker. And sure enough, one of them, where they do the Jeep chase, was right outside the hotel. It was basically around the back. And there was the Zona cocktail bar.
Was there?
Yeah. And the Stalker cocktail bar and pizzeria. And there was, and you could see it. You could see, oh, well, yeah, that's where the motorcyclist comes. And that's where, and it's kind of a little bit like they've done with the Albert Dock or the Docklands in London, where they've got little boutiques and museums there now. But the architecture is the same. And then the last day of the festival, I went to the power station where they filmed the later parts of the film. They were having a kind of farmer's market. It was sort of like you had to pay admittance and then you could go and taste loads of different foods and oysters here and this and that and the other. And it was just utterly different to how it is when it's filmed. But at the same time, you could still see it was like a palimpsest. You could still see the original text underneath.
Oh, interesting.
And it didn't spoil it. It didn't make me go, oh, look, they've ruined it. It was sort of like, yeah, this is it's still haunting the place.
How interesting. And you were there for a film festival. I'm sure you're being honest. If you'd just been there for a stag night, which I gather it's rather popular for, you'd have admitted that. But I wonder, did this mean there were quite a lot of other Stalker pilgrims there?
None. No, not. I mean, it's presumably, the festival itself had kind of wrung that angle dry at some point. It was just my first trip there, so it was like, okay, this is one of the main things I want to see, and I get foolishly and childishly delighted when there's a place near Lake Garda here where they shot one of the James Bonds, like the tunnel in Quantum of Solace, and I'm sort of like, oh, we're driving through the tunnel that was my wife has to tell me to behave.
But it's interesting, isn't it, with this. I like your description of it as there being a sort of palimpsest and the original is behind the reality. A nice inversion there. But I do get this thing that I do that quite often in various places in the world, quite often in England actually, because of a similarity of climate. I mean, you'll be in a landscape and you'll be in the zone, and it's quite often if we're on a train or something, I'll look out the window and I'll say to my wife, oh, Zona. And I love the way that, okay, you were there where the zone was filmed. And as you know, it wasn't Tarkovsky's first choice of where the zone should be. But you can find yourself in the zone in all sorts of places, can't you?
Yeah, it's the old Mephistopheles describing hell, isn't it? That, hell is not circumscribed, yes. But in this case, it's the zone, frame of mind. I find that with Solaris as well, the very first vision of Chris in his sort of garden and meadow, that for me is early summer, spring. That any meadow is suddenly, I'm in Solaris,
Yes, I mean that. Me too. I feel actually when I say the zone is a sort of, in a way, a non-specific Tarkovsky place because it's also the meadows of Mirror as well.
Right.
There's such those early, that unbelievable moment when we arrive in the zone and we go into colour. One of the greatest moments in cinema history, which I can never tell exactly when it's going to come, but that sort of landscape of very verdant greens and tilted telegraph poles, which you get in, I think you get in Solaris and in Mirror. That's Tarkovsky land, isn't it? And it's something I address in the book. I say, well, why is it this film, Stalker, that's meant so much to me? And I think it must have to do with something buried deep in my childhood, not even buried, sorry, but something deep in my childhood of, growing up in Gloucestershire, similarly damp weather, and quite a lot of up near where I was born, there was this about, Cheltenham used to have lots of stations. I think it had 3. And one of these abandoned stations, heavily overgrown, semi-ruined. It hadn't yet been redeveloped into a sort of industrial technological estate. So there it was. The zone was there, right in I was within walking distance of the zone, and I think that might be part of the reason why the film exerted such a power over me.
That's so interesting because I was brought up in Cumbria, and we spent a lot of our childhood walking through fields, and I've always got this thing of, the countryside, if you grew up in it, is cowpats and insects and dead sheep in streams and stuff like that. It's not a romantic place. I mean, I remember they used to hang crows from the barbed wire fence that sort of stuff. So you'd have, but you did spend a lot of time sort of with your jeans getting increasingly wet as you strode through the long grass, and it was boggy, and you could the middle of the field is marshy, so you should go around the edges. And that there is that in Stalker, that they're getting, well, you make the point that they're getting ferociously damp throughout the film, and there's something, I don't know, that chill gets into your bones, but it feels very familiar as well.
Yes, it does, yeah, and it's. I think also it's for Stalker himself, the zone is a place of memories, isn't it? It's and the thing is, it never disappoints him when he gets there and just says in that lovely way, here we are, home at last. That's that successful return he makes, and of course his clients. Right from the start, they have that, so they're in the mode of the disgruntled tourists who feel, this isn't quite what it was like on the poster or the brochure.
Wait a minute, there'll be a farmer's market along in about 50 years' time. You can enjoy it then. I was thinking as well last night when I was watching Where Eagles Dare, and I was kind of thinking of our conversation and sort of linking the two films together. There is a sense that Where Eagles Dare is a film that happens very outside, that there's a surprising amount of, because at the very beginning there's these back projections where anytime Richard Burton's got to be in the snow, he's in a studio, everybody else is in the snow and he's in a studio unpacking the radio or something on a hill with a back projection behind him. But then as the film goes on, it's not actually, quite a lot of it seems to be on location and shot. And if it's not on location, at least it's set outside. There is this kind of connection between the two films, that these are both films about journeys into a place. They're both films to some degree that have a mission. And also, with Stalker, someone is carrying a bomb as well. And bombs are the language which Where Eagles Dare speaks.
Well, indeed. I mean, I completely agree with you, John. They're both sort of mission films, aren't they? A small unit of people going into a place of danger behind enemy lines, in the case of Where Eagles Dare, into the zone, which where they have to sneak into it. But they're sort of structurally, they're inverted in a way, in that in Stalker, the chase part of it happens at the beginning. They're pursued on their way into the zone, whereas in Where Eagles Dare, the chase happens as they're trying to get out of the castle and its environs. And they're pursued by people on motorbikes in both things. But yes, that quality of the mission and the way that, I mean, both films are journeys, that's quite important. And I think, actually, just to go back to that chase part about Stalker, we tend to forget there's the initial very slow sequence of Stalker waking up in his sort of monochrome place. But then the kind of the first chunk of it is it's all action actually. Once they leave the bar and start trying to get through the perimeter of the zone, and then as the film goes on, it continues being a journey. Although what happens is that the amount of ground to be covered becomes less measurable, if you like. At one point, they say, one of the I think it's writer says, what's the problem? We could walk there in 5 minutes. It's only a couple of 100 yards away, but it becomes this impossible to measure thing. So, but it continues that thing of an actual physical journey, even if as the film progresses, the journey becomes far more digressive, metaphysical, philosophical.
Yeah, that's sort of the bit that he gets stopped because he thinks, he thinks he hears an order. And I remember in the book you say you're not quite so keen on those magical elements of where the film seems to a little bit put its thumb on the scale of what you're supposed to be believing is happening.
Well, right. At the time, I remember that I really liked the bit where that bird in the sort of the room of dunes flaps and then disappears. But then I like it more, I think, when there's this perpetual, there's this unresolved thing, the zone. Is it a place of these magical possibilities, as Stalker says it is, or is it just a bit of sort of wasteland? And I like the way that when it's both of those things, when it's perfectly ordinary and absolutely extraordinary at the same time. And at that point, you realize, that's what cinema's all about, isn't it? I'm of that generation whereby so much of the cinemascape of contemporary film is devoid of interest to me because it's so obviously CGI'd. I like it when it's a real landscape filmed, that is to say, apprehended with extraordinary sensitivity. I mean, so that's what you get in those films by the Turkish guy whose name I'm frightened of mispronouncing, Nuri Bilge
Ceylan,
whatever his name is.
Yeah. Once upon a time in Anatolia.
Anatolia, in all of his films, it looks like, frankly, a bit of a dump, but it also looks like it's a place where the magic of cinema happens all the time, isn't it?
Yeah, I know what you mean, and there is that sense. I think there's that sense that the cosmic comedy of Stalker is that on the one hand it could be this magical what you've just described, but on the other hand it's like when the writer and Stalker turn up and they meet the professor again, he's just stopped and having his lunch, and it's just like where are you coming from? And it's just like that's so funny, It's just
it's funny. I mean, Tarkovsky does seem to have been a bit of a prig, really, in all the accounts you hear of him. But there is there's always some humour in the film. So even in is it in Nostalgia? Well, by which point I think Tarkovsky has succumbed to a sense of deep self-reverence, and so there's a lot of self-karaoke in that film. I think there's a story where somebody's walking along and they see somebody in a slimy pond. They're telling this story, and so he pulls him out of this slimy pond, and the person he's rescued says, what are you doing? I live here. So I like the way that there are these gags in Tarkovsky, and of course in Stalker, as you rightly say, there are these they're almost bits of slapstick.
Yeah, and it's people losing their hats, and I mean, it's comedy in a Beckett sense of the word, but Beckett doing Laurel and Hardy,
Yeah, it really is. It really is that.
One of the things that reading both the books in quick succession after having read them a few years ago. One of the things I was noticing was I was thinking of Clint Eastwood and Richard Burton being a sort of version of Writer and the Professor, or similar. Not that identity might be too neat, but similarly diverse sort of archetypes. And even you've got Burton being the guy who wants to know where the stationery cupboard is, but as you point out. Eastwood being this squinty homicidal maniac, but they're both kind of delighters in destruction. That scene where the first scene where they're blowing stuff up and they're in the motorbike, And Burton's just laughing his head off with a maniacal glee. He hasn't even done anything yet.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yes, that's absolutely right, I think. And I mean, I think there's this sort of anecdote that I remember hearing that initially in that scene in the Great Hall, I believe the dialogue was split more evenly between Burton and Eastwood, and then they decided that actually Burton, with his wonderful voice, would do most of the speaking, and Eastwood would do the squinting and the killing. That was I think it's a great reminder, and this is something that David Thompson says, isn't it? That well, of course, Burton had this amazing, wonderful voice, but as important as the voice or people's being able to express through their face the sort of psychology is just the pleasure of watching somebody move. Even if you think, as I do, that nearly all the films Eastwood directed are terrible, and a lot of the sort of films he's in as a star are not up to much. I mean, one of the supreme movers in cinema, I think. And I think Burton's phrase for the way Eastwood moves when he talks about his kind of dynamic lethargy is very hard to beat.
When the good, the bad, and the ugly, after they blow up the bridge, and they've basically stayed there all night, sort of covered in debris, and they get up in the morning and they stretch Eli Wallach and Eastwood, and they walk towards the ruins of the bridge. And the way, Eli Wallach is sort of stretching and trying to get the muscles alive. And Eastwood just is walking. And at one point, he just puts a hand out to kind of usher Ugly out of the way, because he get out. I'm in my smooth trajectory, cannot be in any way disturbed by human ideas. And it's just lovely.
Yeah, we're in absolute agreement with that. Just out of sequence, John, because I meant to say this earlier and I forgot. I mean, as proof of the way that Stalker is so inexhaustible for me, there are all sorts of things that have come to light since I finished the book, which I sort of wish I'd had a chance to include in it. And God, this kind of big question about what is the zone, and it's a question that everybody asks Tarkovsky, and of course it's something that there's no definitive answer to it. But after the book came out, I was reading Consciousness is Harnessed to Flesh. It's the second volume of Susan Sontag's diaries. And she remembers something that her friend Joseph Brodsky, who of course spent time in the camps, said to her. He said, "Prisoners in the camps, in the gulag, speak a lot about absolutes, futile absolutes. The greatest fuck in the world, the metal that can cut through any prison bars. It's the other side of powerlessness." And I think it's a good example of the way that the gulag sort of suffuses Stalker. And in a way, it seems to me that's a good definition of what the room is, this place where your deepest wish comes true. But of course it doesn't in the way you want. So the room as great Brodsky phrase, the room as futile absolute.
Yeah, absolutely. The sort of that's so powerful, and yet the power, as you say, matched with futility. It's sort of like, I mean, I can't help. I'm thinking a lot, like I think everybody is these days, about Elon Musk. And he is like that's what happens when you get to the room every day of the week, because you know what I mean? He can do anything he wants. His greatest desires, unconscious or otherwise. I mean, he pays somebody to play video games under his username so that he can be at the top of the scoreboards and say, look at my gameplay is and I'm doing this, and I'm running a company, and I'm running the American government.
I'll add that as well if there's a chance to. If the book can be reissued with a postscript of all the things that I've learned since that I wish I'd known at the time,
updated and revised.
That's the thing about the structure of the book, because it's just in, it's these two long sections without chapters. It's not susceptible to revision. All I can do is add some sort of appendix or afterthought to it.
But would that be something you would be happy to do, or that's something you sort of?
I think so. Yeah. In fact, I've just done exactly that for a rather belated Greek translation. They asked if I'd like to add something, and I jumped at the chance to just mention some extra thoughts. And one of them, actually, I mean, when we did this mad thing when the book came out, this lunatic in New York called Lawrence Weschler, he had the idea. He staged this screening of of Stalker. He called the event Tarkovsky Interrupt Us. We would play about 40 minutes of the film, then stop it, and then about 4 or 5 of us would have a discussion on stage explaining what had happened. So the whole thing, the film's about nearly 3 hours, and then we extended it to about 5 hours. And it was a great event. Great, partly because one of the participants was Walter Murch, the film editor and all-round genius.
Polymath, and yeah.
Oh my God, he had such great things to say about Tarkovsky and Stalker. So I quote him in this afterward for the Greek edition as well.
That's wonderful. We need to do a Where Eagles Dare Interrupt Us as well.
Oh, yes, yes, yeah, we really do. Yeah,
we just keep stopping it and saying that music as well is some of my favorite. That's my takeoff music. When I've got a playlist on my phone of takeoff music when I'm going anywhere. And I play it just as the plane's beginning to take off.
Oh, that's good.
As we get towards the runway, it's okay. I'll start my takeoff music, and it eases my nerves and makes it exciting.
Very good.
Is there another film that you would like to address in this format?
Yes, there is, but I don't know whether I'll do it. But if I were to do another book, it would be Point Blank by John Boorman, and that comes in every way. It comes between Where Eagles Dare and Stalker, both in terms of its seriousness and in terms of when I saw it. In that, I think I saw Point Blank when I was just developing some consciousness that a film might be different to something you see on TV. And it's a film which I love every bit as much as I love the other two. I'm just not sure whether I will. I'm just not sure whether this way of doing it, because both of these two books that we've been discussing, they both summarize what's going on. And I'm just not sure if it's got if that method has enough legs in it, but it would also be. I mean, I think it's an amazing film, and I find Lee Marvin as an actor so extremely interesting. And of course, the way he moves, I mean, he's as much of a great mover, a great walker as Clint Eastwood is.
Absolutely, there's stomping walk.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind what the film would be. The only doubt is whether I can do justice to it.
I ideally hope you take that forward. Have you heard the story with John Boorman getting drunk with Lee Marvin?
No.
They're at a restaurant, and Lee Marvin is really drunk, much drunker than John Boorman, and so Boorman decides, okay, I'm going to take his car because he's too drunk to drive. So he jumps. He while Marvin's indisposed, he runs out to the parking lot and gets in the car. And Marvin runs after him, and he jumps on the ceiling hood of the car and then climbs up onto the. And Boorman, being himself quite tipsy, decides, well, it's not that far to the hotel, so I'll just drive him back. And he's stopped by the police, and the policeman says, "Excuse me, sir, do you know you've got Lee Marvin on the roof of your car?" As if like
Oh,
this has
God.
happened before. It's
Yeah,
not,
yeah,
we
yeah.
have to stop people every now and again because Lee Marvin's often on the roof of their car.
Oh, I love that as well because it's got echoes, of course, of Richard Burton on the cable car and also Clint Eastwood on the roof of the yellow school bus in Dirty Harry.
Oh, there you go. Oh, I mean, one thing I really thought when I was watching, I've always felt really sorry for the three villains in Where Eagles
Oh,
Dare. They get
yeah.
hurt in abominable ways. They're really.
They get, yeah, I mean, there's no more, there's a load of people killed in Where Eagles Dare, but there is no more violent moment than when Richard Burton just boots one of them on the roof of the cable car right in the cake hole. I mean, that really hurts, doesn't it? He gets a real face full of Richard Burton's boot.
And it's so protracted, him actually falling off. He's screaming in terror for a good minute before he drops. And
Yes,
it's just like,
yeah, yeah. They do get to use that phrase that Dirty Harry's partner uses in the first of those films. Yeah, they really get the shit end of the stick, those lot, don't they? But then they deserve it. They're traitors.
yeah, but if that film was remade, heaven forfend, they would do something egregious in the first act, which would allow you to enjoy their demise. But
Yes,
they're
right.
just notionally wrong uns. I was wondering if there's a Philby thing going on. My history is a little bit hazy here, but the main traitor always strikes me, sort of got foppish hairdo, always strikes me as a little bit, and he's right at the top of MI6,
I see, yeah, interesting. I guess that, yeah, how could there not be, given when the film was made and how pervasive that stuff was? By the way, since we mentioned that, what great acting in the TV adaptation of A Spy Among Friends with Guy Pearce and what's his name, the guy from Band of Brothers. Oh my God.
Oh, Damian Lewis.
Yes, exactly. Wow. I mean, yeah. I mean, superb adaptation of an excellent book.
That's the Ben McIntyre book, right?
That's right. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. But it's the film version, TV version. But God, it looks like it's a proper cinematic experience. Just the particular sort of, they always get the period detail right in adaptations, but something about just capturing the kind of atmosphere of the times visually. That film did it so well, I thought. An amazing performance by Guy Pearce.
And are you beyond the film books? Is there a new Geoff Dyer on its way?
Oh, thank you for asking. Yeah, coming soon to a cinema near you. There's a book called Homework, which is a memoir of my life up to the age of 18. And let me reassure you and anyone listening, this is not the first volume of a Knausgaard-like sequence. It's up to the age of 18, and nothing. I won't write anything about my life beyond the age of 18. But yeah, 300 pages about my childhood and adolescence from 1958 to 1976.
No, I look forward to that. That would be that's one. When's it coming out? In the near future?
It comes out in May in the UK and June in America of this year. And yeah, I mean, I think in the afterword to the Where Eagles Dare book, I talk about the way that this book, in a way, is a chapter of an autobiography. And it turns out that this is the larger partial autobiography.
Yeah, you should just have a chapter number like halfway through the book, which says C Broadsword
Yes,
Calling Danny Boy,
yeah,
and then the next chapter straight afterwards.
Yeah, quite right. Yeah.
So finally, Geoff, I'd love to have your recommended film book.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry if it seems entirely predictable, but it can only be David Thompson's dictionary in all its different editions, actually. I think it's not just, I mean, I've said this sort of in print, it's not just the greatest book about cinema, it's one of the great books of our time. It's so fantastic. And I think I've read it. I must I must have read every entry in every edition, So, but I say that, but there's probably some little nook or corner that I've not quite explored. But I'm always sort of, when I'm mentioning it, I'm always saying to people, there is this Rosetta Stone entry that you have to read. It's the pattern at the center of the carpet. And I think it first appears maybe in the third edition. And I never reveal you probably know, John, who it's about. So we won't, in a sort of Burton-like way, you can write the name in the notebook and pass it to me now, but we won't say who it is. But it's the most moving thing in any book I know. So I think it would be. I think it would be that. It's the most incredible undertaking, and I love that. I love that book in all its iterations so much. But since that was such an obvious choice for me, I'll just mention a couple of others that I love. I mean, I really like the way that Michael Ondaatje followed up The English Patient, Booker Prize winning, hugely successful film made into a great film. I love the way that his next book after that was a rather modest book called The Conversations, his conversations with the man we mentioned earlier, Walter Murch, which I think is both a beautifully produced book and, I mean, Murch says incredible things. I like the way that his vision is both, of course, as an editor, it's microscopic and cosmically vast. I like that a great deal. I also have a great fondness for Gilbert Adair's book Flickers, where he chooses one film from each year of the cinema's history. It was the centenary of the invention of cinema, which I find, like David's, it's a fantastically written, eccentric book. And then, I do, even though it's a source of great happiness to me that I'm not at all involved in making films at all. I have a great fondness for Stephen Bark's book, Final Cut, subtitled Dreams and Disasters in the Making of Heaven's Gate, of which he was, I think, an executive producer or an executive at United Artists. So I love that tale, that suspense-packed tale from the inside of that famously disastrous production.
There's nothing better than reading a book about a terribly The Devil's Candy is another one about Bonfire of the Vanities, and you just spend half the book going, why are you doing? I mean, at least with Days of Heaven, they made a halfway decent film, but Bonfire of the Vanities, it's like, why were they bothering to take so much effort to make this rubbish?
Yes, absolutely. And it's so suspenseful, though, the Bark book. I mean, there's that great bit where they have a meeting and they know they're really on the precipice, and they decide that they can't afford not to give Cimino more money.
Right.
I mean, it's so yes, those are the books that come immediately to mind as books that have meant a great deal to me.
What I love about David's book as well is that it's such a companion to film watching, in the sense that, every film you watch, you go, oh, wait a minute, let's just see what David says about the cinematographer or the and you do that after, and it just enriches your experience.
Oh, you're so right. So when we went to this screening of Blue Velvet I think it was just last Sunday, actually. The first, couldn't wait to get home to see what David says about it about Lynch and other people associated with it in the dictionary. And we were talking about Point Blank earlier, and of course one of the great moments in the dictionary, which we are able to disclose, is that kind of fabulous thing, because it's a dictionary, starts with A, ends up with Z, and it's that great bit where he says, the author is torn between his obligation to cover everyone from whoever it is, Antonioni to Zanuck or something, and the straightforward fact that Angie is his favourite actress. And then there's this great sort of eulogy for how much he fancies Angie Dickinson.
But of such things, cinema is made of,
Well, absolutely, yeah.
Of reverence and arse-ache,
Yes. I'd say one of the things that makes the dictionary so enjoyable is the way that David is so infuriatingly wrong about many things. When I'm recommending it to people, I always say, yeah, you have to take that on board as one of its attractions.
One of the things I admire about you and David, and a heck of a lot of writers that I have on this, is everybody has these really assured opinions. And I constantly find myself going, whenever I think something, I'm almost immediately going, but is it? That's great, but is it great? I'm not sure. I've got this constant dialectic going on. I can't, I pretend to be a film critic, but ultimately, if I was honest, I would just be articulating my own puzzlement all the time.
Well, that's not a bad position to have.
Well, listen, Geoff, I want to thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure having you on the podcast. I've wanted to talk to you for a long time. I make no bones about that. That's one thing there's no dialectic about. So, yeah, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, and it's been the pleasure has been entirely mutual, John. So thanks a lot. Okay.